Okay, cool. So the recording is on. Cool, let's start. So hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. So today we are going to cover a very important topic, which is video intelligence and the role it plays in combating counterterrorism activities, right? And also things like hybrid warfare, etc., etc. And today we are joined by Laith Alkhouri, a senior counter-terrorism expert active in the global OSINT community. It's very important to note that with the recent events in the Middle East and with the Ukraine war, the rise in terrorist activities and also issues like hybrid warfare by different states are especially affecting NATO countries and their allies across the globe. And in the discussion today, we are going to cover how video intelligence and also different technology components can essentially effectively protect critical infrastructure and maritime activities. And moreover, so Laith is coming with a huge experience in this space, and he has many publications, including he's very active in media, right, giving interviews to media publications such as CNN, ABC, etc., etc. And he's also very active in advising several governments, especially in Middle East and Asia Pacific. So with this slide, I'm giving the stage to you. Thank you for that.
I apologize for that. Thank you so much, Albert and the Scylla team. I appreciate you having me on again for another, hopefully more engaging webinar to discuss the role of video intelligence in counterterrorism. Thank you for that introduction. And without further ado, I think we're going to get into the meat of the topic. I think the idea here is that video intelligence is just an absolutely critical tool in detecting, in investigating, in being part of the larger security infrastructure, especially as we see threats, as you mentioned, unfold against critical infrastructure and various types of logistics operations that would impact civilians at large. I think when we talk about counterterrorism, I want to just say a few notes, and I think for those who have been with us on a previous webinar, I went over this briefly. But the idea is that counterterrorism is a massive field. You have individuals who are engaged in everything from cyber operations to field operations, anti-money laundering, and so on and so forth. And when we look at terrorists and terrorist groups and terrorist activities, their main goal is really targeting civilians and meanwhile try to obfuscate. Their goal is to disrupt day-to-day life, to change public policy, to change public opinion. And so they seek things like hiding, obfuscation. They seek to launch attacks, conduct operations. They seek to raise finances in order to launch such attacks, and of course launch propaganda against their targets and their enemies. So on our side, as counterterrorism professionals, our main goal is really preventing. As I mentioned, we can look at the various individuals in this field who might be doing investigations, who are active in intelligence collections, who are part of field operations, but everybody shares the thread of that CT's goal is to be preventative. And I'm always excited to talk about Scylla's suite of high-end products because they are a huge part of the security infrastructure to exactly prevent before something happens. In the case something happens, then it is there to investigate. So the idea here is that as we're discussing Scylla's video intelligence, but really video intelligence in general in counterterrorism activities, it is really important to keep in mind that the threat level has been rapidly growing. If I can give you just one statistic, between 2022 to 2023, threats against critical infrastructure, especially things like power grid, nuclear power plants, has grown by 77% in the US alone. And today it is now over 100%. In fact, over the past year and a half, there's been 163 different incidents targeting critical infrastructure, and specifically, again, electrical, nuclear, power grid, as well as maritime. So keep that in mind as we're discussing this critical topic. So when we talk about securing critical infrastructure, it is obviously part of maintaining national security, because here you're not talking about an attack against 1, 2, 3, 10 individuals, which would be absolutely tragic. But it is an attack that could impact hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of people. So imagine that public health and safety is not accessible to people during a blackout. Imagine that a logistics operation has completely failed, which can disrupt entire economies. So securing critical infrastructure is basically securing all of our lives. So we can talk about...
Laith, I have a question. So sorry for interrupting. So we see, like, can you please comment on, before we dive into specific use cases? So we quite actively see this now happening in Central and Eastern Europe, particularly sponsored by Russia, right? So they are performing a hybrid warfare against the states who are supporting Ukraine actively in their, I would say, fair right to liberate their country, right, against the invaders. And we see that Russia is effectively using essentially their missiles and projectiles, specifically drones, right, over Ukraine by hitting energy infrastructure and trying to demoralize the society not to participate in the war, right? So this is actually happening on a daily basis, and we see that also happening in Europe. For example, yesterday there was a sabotage event at one of the German's military bases when the water was poisoned, essentially. We see fires across Central and Eastern Europe, like especially countries like Poland, which are most probably sponsored by, again, Russian-backed terrorists or groups or whatever, right? So this is essentially one of the key points of hybrid warfare, right, which is happening today. So it's not only already think of the past or the future or something we read in the news, right? So we see it every day, and governments and also security agencies are trying to combat it on a daily basis in the United States and also particularly in Central Eastern Europe, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. This is absolutely a critical point. In fact, you know, some of the stats I mentioned were just only in specific regions, but globally it is much higher than that. And as you mentioned, it's hybrid warfare. So when we talk about counterterrorism activities, it's not just against specifically non-state actors who might be trying to launch attacks. It's against also, you know, individuals who are state-sponsored. Hybrid warfare is now also partially cyber, partially physical, and state-sponsored actors are actually seeking to disrupt on both sides. So, you know, protecting that physical infrastructure is in some instances even more important than protecting from the cyber side, because it is much more difficult to do a cyber attack on a grid rather than a physical attack. Just back in April, there was an advisory that critical infrastructure is probably the weakest spot for foreign agents to target. And I think, to your point, that is a critical part. So when we talk about energy supplies, we talk about electrical grids, of course, power plants, oil and pipelines. You know, we're talking about aviation, bridges that do all types of transport, railways. We saw railways being not only heavily targeted, but also groups like Al-Qaeda themselves have put out multiple incitements to target and derail railways, which has already taken place multiple times. And I want to take the folks back to the days when Osama bin Laden was taken out back in 2011. Their group put out a two-part video specifically talking about targeting things like SCADA systems, right? These are really, really important to keep note of. As you mentioned, this is not new. There are attacks that have already taken place. There's incitement every day, and it just keeps growing. We can look at communication technology, mass communication technology. So telcos, we can talk data centers, satellites. Of course, financial sector is a massive critical infrastructure for any economy, for any region, for any country. Stock exchanges, banks, payment systems. From a defense standpoint, I think enemies would absolutely love to cripple response and defense. So military bases, of course, weapon systems and contractors. And finally, we can talk about healthcare, as I mentioned, emergency services, pharmas and hospitals. Go ahead, Albert.
Yeah, to your point, right? So it's an obvious target to obviously do a sabotage of the defense military base or forward operating bases, etc. But this is the kind of no-brainer target for them, right? So what we have seen in Europe recently and we got customers essentially who applied to Scylla and using the system is more or less with the industrial defense complex in Europe. And they are now a soft target because it's very easy to disrupt the supply chain of, let's say, a production of a specific electronic part for the German tanks, like from Rheinmetall, or a Czech manufacturer, which is doing a specific electronic part for drones, right, or missile defense systems. And actually, those plants are not very well protected. They are using like very old access control systems. Some of them even have analog cameras, like they have no clue about the AI technology that can do intrusion detection or backup behind. And those are very easy targets because specifically in Europe, right, there is a huge presence of Russian agents or foreign agents, right, which have connections, which have access, which some were working in those facilities at some point of time, right? And specifically for those companies which are working in the military and industrial defense complex, those are quite soft targets and easily achievable by bad actors like nowadays. And we have seen those happening in Europe for the past couple of years.
Absolutely. They are absolutely all soft targets. And to your point, one critical thing you mentioned is manufacturers that are manufacturing very specific parts for missiles, for defense systems, and for others. So even, you know, third-party supply disruption and in various parts of the world, since various countries might many times work on producing or jointly produce a type of weaponry or a types of ship or other types of operations that might be involved jointly. Disrupting one specific piece of production can disrupt the entire operation. So yeah, it remains the point that critical infrastructure is really the backbone of countries. It is the backbone of the globe. And so threats against any type of critical infrastructure, again, be it energy, transportation, financial, defense, healthcare, and others, is a threat really against anyone and everyone. And so this is why we see that terrorist groups, violent extremists, foreign agents, vandals, disruptors, they're always keeping their eyes set on attacking them and disrupting them. Again, the repercussions are not just the lives that could be lost, but also it is impacting the policy of that specific country, or impacting the policy of NATO, impacting the policy, the public opinion of people to be afraid for these agents and these terrorists to become a household name. So we wanted to, you know, prevention again is everything. So let's discuss a few real life cases that have already taken place, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Going as far back as 2013, when there was a massive sniper attack on the PG&E core Metcalf substation in San Jose, California. Well over 100 rounds were fired at the substation. And we're talking about high caliber rifles here. In fact, the individuals have not been identified, and it's already been 11 years since then. Not only it was able to knock the transmission offline, but also disrupted services to an extended area, and it took many hours of repair. One interesting statistically is that the cost was over $15 million just to repair this attack, what was labeled sometime a professional job or a hit job, that some people labeled as a foreign agent job. Some others labeled it as domestic terrorists. When you are uncertain, you're unaware of who's behind it, it is really difficult to understand their patterns and their behavior. So this is a perfect example of what you were just talking about, Albert, is that this has been happening for a long time. This is already taking place, and it is growing. And this is just one of the many examples. We can look at another example, the drone attack that targeted the power grid in Pennsylvania. Again, the use of UAVs to target electrical grid is massive. Some of them are low flying. There are multiple rules and regulations around the world in the use of drones But unfortunately, it is something that's really difficult to control. It's really difficult to trace back. And because of their availability, like DJI drones and others, which is what was used here, it is absolutely difficult to keep your eyes on it. So intrusion detection, breach of parameter, and of course, rapid response as a matter of fact would be very critical. And that's where Scylla would have been a preventative and investigative measure.
It's actually interesting that you mentioned DJI. I'm in parallel to Scylla and my activities on day-to-day operations, working as a consultant for some agencies, right? And I'm creating a report, so like how DJI is actually disrupting the warfare globally. So traditionally, like if you take like the existence of the humanity for the last, let's say, 40,000 years of the warfare, right? Starting when we started using sticks to drones currently, or nuclear missiles, right? So traditionally the war has been the push for the progress of the technology. Like now it's vice versa. Actually, the civilian technology like FPV drones or drones which are used by non-professionals, right, are changing how the warfare is done. And a good example of that is the 2020 Karabakh war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and also now the war in Ukraine, right, where the drones are being successfully used from both sides and actually disrupting the warfare, right? And DJI is the biggest manufacturer of non-military drones, right? And they have their own military department as well. But they're actually like one of the biggest beneficiaries of any warfare or any war happening globally now, just because you can order it from AliExpress without any customs duties and get it in any country, right? So actually now the table turned, right? So big manufacturers like Lockheed Martin are not producing progress anymore. It's actually civilian manufacturers like DJI are changing how the warfare is done globally.
You're absolutely right. In fact, to your point, ever since ISIS even expanded in various parts of the world, they would buy various DJI drones, they would modify them, and they would basically plant IEDs, explosive devices on them, and use them as some sort of, suicide drones. It continues to be a critical issue, but also now that it's been used in failed assassinations, now it's been used to target not only critical infrastructure, but also urban areas, crowded cities. All of that makes the threat really massive and highly unpredictable. And that's why Scylla is a force multiplier to any security unit, to any law enforcement, to any team that is working on both, again, prevention and investigation. And if I can add maybe even more examples, we saw in 2015 the explosions at the petrochemical plant in Marseille in France, which happened just shortly after the attack at Charlie Hebdo newspaper, which killed unfortunately 12 people, but also it came also a week after there was an attack at a gas plant. France was experiencing rapid attacks one after the other, and just at the onset of the Olympics this year, we saw also arson attack targeting the railways. So we keep seeing this in the US, we keep seeing it in Europe, we keep seeing it target various critical infrastructure areas, and using many times rudimentary means. It doesn't mean that they're using sophisticated means. And so we've seen several attempts against nuclear power plants. I mean, just imagine the catastrophe and the devastation from that. But in general, at least since 1970, that what have been documented so far in the US alone, there's been nearly 500 incidents against critical infrastructure, and worldwide it's in the thousands. So the threat is absolutely massive, as you mentioned. As the technology gets better, as hybrid warfare is more visible, we absolutely have to be vigilant in what we put in place to protect against these types of incidents. Go ahead, Albert.
To your point, right? So let me, obviously you're the expert, but let me add a couple of points, right? So obviously we have seen the rise of terror attacks like in between the timeline of end of 60s and then start of 80s, right? Between the when it was a Cold War, obviously, and the Vietnam War. And a lot of people were not happy with the wars happening overall. And there was an incitement, right? So it was basically a clash between the Western type of civilization and the communist world, which was like on the East, right? And more or less, like the rise of the events was happening just because the communists were sponsoring different parties in Latin America, in Central Eastern Europe, in African region, in Asia Pacific. But at that point of time, even with the huge investments coming from both sides into hybrid warfare, you had to have a human in between. So now you don't, right? So there's a huge push because we work with many agencies and work with departments of defense of many countries. So a huge push is happening towards an autonomous warfare. And obviously, it's not only like state actors are using it, but also like bad actors are going to use it, private groups are going to use it. And also it will be the main the weapon of the hybrid warfare, because now suddenly you don't need a human, which can be radicalized or believe in this or that ideology, be sponsored, have tools in place. Now, like you can pretty much sit 20 or 30 or 40 miles away and perform a hybrid attack using some kind of technology, right? Be it a drone, be it like the robot dogs, be it a vessel or whatever, right? So we're gonna see a rise of these events because pretty much we live in another Cold War, and now you don't have two states, you have many states in an actual war situation, right? And you have an advanced technology which is accessible to everyone, and you have a lot of private and commercial entities, etc., involved in military and industrial complex. So my projection, as if you call it, so we're going to see the rise of events rather than the downscale, and it's going to get worse, right?
It is absolutely going to get worse. There is absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, statistics, I think, don't lie in general. I think when you look at the patterns and the behaviors and the stats, all the evidence is leading us to see that it's hybrid warfare is increasing. Attacks that don't require a human in the middle are increasing. Incitement is increasing. Actual foiled as well as successful attacks are increasing. And the more we look at how vulnerable the critical infrastructure is, the more we should be concerned. I mean, we're talking about, places that rely on 20-year-old technology to protect these vulnerable, highly critical sites. I think that should be not only not good, but it should be unacceptable for any government, for any country, for any company to continue to rely on super old technology where threat actors have already seen all the vulnerabilities, they have already breached all the gaps, and we are still not implementing everything we need to implement. So 100%, we're going to see even more of that. And in fact, I'm going to be discussing a couple of cases that we worked on recently that include sensitive site as well as maritime incidents. And that just show that by implementing an advanced technology, you could absolutely prevent catastrophes. When we automate the monitoring process using AI video analytics or AI video intelligence, we can easily alert personnel to potential threats and really be a force multiplier for any team. Even if you're a small security team, you immediately are enhanced by having more eyes, more highly empowered detection eyes everywhere to keep your eyes on blind spots, on weak spots. You're able rapid response. You're not thinking in hindsight. Actually, you are thinking in real time. And then once you have that in place, many times you're able to simply prevent attacks from happening, which is what we really want to do from a prevention standpoint. But you're also able to document activities either as they're occurring or after they occur or before they occur. And what that is really important is to use, you can get that video evidence, these documentation, help in solving old cases or emergent cases, use it in evidentiary support against perpetrators. And of course, you can inform your decision-making down the line. If you realize from this incident or accident that there is, again, a weak spot, a blind spot, there is a parameter that was not protected enough, then you're able to inform your decisions in the future. And that's how intelligence really works, right? It's a cyclical pattern. You're able to use what you have learned in this cycle and implement it for the next cycle, so you don't fall in the same trap of being in a weak position to defend. This is just a snapshot of why this is important. So in essence, you're able to identify suspicious behavior. You're able to spot unattended objects, groups, individuals. You're able to prevent and investigate unauthorized access, and who are the people who are trying to do that. You're able to find, investigate, and arrest wanted individuals, and be it disruptors, traffickers, terrorists, state agents, kidnappers, smugglers, all types of physical threat actors who are seeking to harm others, harm our infrastructure, and of course find missing and trafficked individuals. And we know that individuals are in danger. We're talking about so far, I mean, we're talking about today over 25 million trafficked individuals worldwide. Half of them are children, both boys and girls. And so when we have an Amber Alert, you're also able to action that. I work in my volunteer capacity as also Chief Intelligence Officer of an NGO that combats human trafficking, child exploitation. Scylla's technology is absolutely critical at spotting traffickers and missing individuals in places like airports, train stations, various sensitive locations, borders. So it's important for Customs and Border Protection, and so many other sites. Without further ado, let's discuss a scenario that's a real scenario where we have a critical infrastructure facility. Be it a power plant, nuclear plant, power grid, electrical grid. We're talking about, could be military facility, a data center, a massive data center. So any impact on massive data centers can impact access to data for thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, including emergency services. So we can see so many different types of threats that could potentially pose harm to this kind of facility. So it could be individuals who are carrying arms and weapons, assailants, vehicles, suspicious vehicles, individuals who are trying to breach the perimeter, and suspicious packages left. And again, we've seen all of these types of examples targeting critical infrastructure facilities in both Europe and in the United States. And so when the facility is equipped with the right AI-powered video intelligence like Scylla, not only they're able to spot ahead of time, they're able to determine where the perimeter is, they're able to see if an assailant's trying to cross that perimeter, or individuals who are armed casing that environment, or are suspicious packages that have been left by those individuals. And what happens then? Well, when the technology is able to spot any of these activities, they're able to send immediate alerts to the security team. The security team doesn't have to have a guard at every single corner of these massive facilities. I mean, we're talking about, it requires an army of people to be there to potentially protect. But since organizations and facilities don't have that, to have a force multiplier to enhance that kind of protection in real time, and have AI be your buddy and your friend, you're able to implement that for the centralized security center and be alerted. So what happens when you get those immediate alerts? Well, you're able to have immediate rapid response, deploy guards, deploy security teams, deploy armed individuals to that location, and go look for the potential suspects, or gather the evidence and the documentation, which also helps in understanding where your weak spots were, where your blind spots were. When you look at that vehicle, it got too close to that perimeter. So if it got too close to that perimeter, well, maybe we need to change where that perimeter is. Maybe those vehicles need to have access control to be able to enter a certain area before they get close to that facility. And the same thing goes for any type of individual. Maybe they are trying to gain access when they don't have access control privileges to that facility. Sorry, Albert, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, one of the use cases for vehicles, essentially, that we provide is we provide the suspicious behavior of the essentially transportation objects, right? Vehicles, right? So if a vehicle is appearing next to a military base or nuclear station or water pipeline, right? Like, and it's basically stalking or just parking there, right, for an amount of time, and we see that vehicle again in 2 hours, and then again in 2 days or within a week time, right? So we can set up those rules, like, and you can see it, and you can basically just send a security guard to ask the driver what they are doing there, right? What's the purpose of their visit near that facility? So you can also
Absolutely,
identify the
that's a great
patterns.
example. Great example. You're able to set the rules, which is it's a customized technology. You're able to set the rules for if that vehicle or if that individual are spotted within a certain period of time, a certain duration, this many times. You're able to not only be alerted but an investigator, but you're also able to document that pattern. You're able to follow that vehicle and that individual from every single camera that's planted across the facility or across that organization. It's a great point, Albert. And this is a perfect case to when you look at any facility, it's not a small space. I mean, it's a massive place, right? And it is also extremely vulnerable as an environment. So most organizations, most facilities are not spending hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars hiring physical security guards to be in all those locations. But AI is able to not only enhance your operations, but also track automatically based on the rules you customize in the system. I believe we have a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, we should just answer it by reading it, so the attendees cannot, they do not have a voice control.
Oh, you can just add the question to the Q&A, and then we'll target them after we go through a couple of more cases. I promise I won't be long-winded anymore. So we have protected that facility just based off of the technologies that we had, the preventative measures in essence. But let's talk about maritime security, given the increased number of attacks that we've seen targeting ships and vessels.
By the way, for the audience, like, thank you, Laith. So those are real use cases where Scylla was used. We cannot disclose the names. We can disclose it on one-by-one discussions, right, with Laith. So those were joint projects together with Scylla by Laith, or just Scylla projects, right, where we worked with the logistics and shipping companies, but also with the government agencies to protect nuclear substations, military bases, etc. So those examples which we are bringing now in the webinar, they are anonymous, but they are real, right? So go ahead, Laith. Thank you for that.
Yeah, Albert, a great point. And as I mentioned, these are real life examples. These are projects that Scylla was critical in being a big part of. And I think that it goes without saying that replicating this kind of scenario is easy to imagine, and it is happening, unfolding in many places. By the way, so much of that goes also unreported because most of those attacks many times go foiled. And so when we look at any vessel that is in places like straits, like the Hormuz Straits and others, where major shipping routes, but also those shipping routes are so close to massive political conflicts, threat actors like the Houthis in Yemen, who have multiple times used things like nautical drones to target these ships. These are low cost, highly effective targeting. These are essentially low flying on water type of drones that are built with explosives and detonators. And what they use them to call uncrewed aerial systems, because there is no crew guiding them, just like any UAV. We have seen this happen multiple times, especially we've seen it this year, targeting everybody from British ships to American ships to various Central and Eastern European vessels going through that incredible areas.
And to your point, Laith, they are very difficult to detect because those ships are normally like very low heat, and the traditional military radar systems, right, are not detecting them effectively. Heat, they're again like low heat systems. They're like very fast normally because like you would take a civilian, I don't know, vessel, right, like, or a sports vessel, low cost. You would put a semi-AI technology that can target,
yep.
and that's it.
Yeah, that's a great point. They are very, very difficult to detect. They're extremely fast. By the time you realize there may be something there, it's already actually too late. And when we see those UASs that are, again, growing. We see Iran supplying so many of those countries with, especially the Houthis in Yemen, with those nautical drones, and vessels are, are in all major shipping. I mean, we're talking about massive logistics that can disrupt the economy for entire regions. This is a case that, thankfully, Scylla was a big part of and prevented these attacks from happening, where once this nautical drone has crossed a perimeter, it is spotted. And as it is spotted from a distance, it is sending an alert to the security team of that vessel, as well as the security team centrally that have access to those alerts. And what happens then? Before this nautical drone reaches the ship, you're able to have fortification, maritime fortification for that vessel, just in case it gets close to that. But also you're able to launch defensive and offensive measures, including, of course, missiles that can blow these nautical drones before they approach that vessel. And this has been discussed multiple times by maritime security agencies who used to rely, again, on older technologies, right? We're talking about old forts, old fortifications of those ships. Now they're able to actually launch defensive and offensive measures well ahead of time. And this was a great successful case that Scylla played a central role in, thankfully. And so when the more we see of those attacks take place, again, by highly funded rebel groups, highly funded terrorist groups, like the Houthis in Yemen, supplied by a major regional power like Iran, we want to make sure that we preach about this case, right? Because so many of the countries have their vessels in the Hormuz Strait and across multiple other straits. We have tensions, political turmoil, war zones across all of these sensitive straits and passageways. So that's a perfect example to show the importance of implementing Scylla in maritime technology to detect perimeter intrusion. So let's talk about tracking suspects across sensitive facilities. And again, this is a real use case that Scylla played a central role in protecting and tracking a specific individual across two different facilities. We look at a military facility in a NATO country. This military facility is not small, it is big. And again, having the ability to protect every single corner of that military facility becomes absolutely critical. And the Scylla system detected an individual who might have been casing the place, but also he was documenting, he was photographing these areas. And that always raises an eyebrow, that always raises suspicion, why this individual is taking pictures of a sensitive military facility in a specific location. Now that sends an alert to the security team. Now that individual, after having finished there, is seen at a nuclear facility very close by to that military facility. Again, taking pictures and casing that nuclear facility. That not only raises eyebrows, that becomes highly suspicious behavior. And that individual is also spotted and sent to the central security system. What's interesting here in this case is that it was then determined using Scylla's technology, not only after they've been spotted, that it was the same person who was casing and photographing a sensitive military facility and this nuclear power plant. And that is absolutely powerful, something that would have taken investigators weeks, maybe months to determine if that individual was there to be the same individual, and also what that individual was doing there. It is auto detection by a technology like Scylla. It's able to also do that facial recognition, and it's able to document and provide evidence of what that individual was doing. Of course, thankfully, that individual was apprehended, interrogated, and questioned without having to divulge too much of the results of that incident. Scylla's critical role in identifying the suspicious behavior and matching that individual is the same individual who was at two different facilities. Absolutely help investigators understand why that individual was there. So the last couple of cases, as we mentioned, are absolutely critical to understand because they are unfolding rapidly. They're happening all the time. And we want to be able to have those agencies, those organizations, and those critical infrastructure areas be completely protected 360 all around 24/7. And I don't want to go too much into the rest of those cases because this is something I discussed in the past. But if we look at something like the Paris attacks that took place, I mean, those individuals passed through Europe and back in Syria and back to Europe twice. There was already a red notice by Interpol. They passed undetected because there was no system like Scylla in place. Would have easily detected them based on their facial profile. And unfortunately, it did not happen. So having something like Scylla in place with combined with data from a red notice or Interpol and other allied agencies would have easily intercepted those individuals and apprehended them. Things like individuals who are gathering outside an embassy or a different location where gun detection, facial recognition, and information is run against all types of lists and all types of data fusion center. Essentially, you're able to have that automatically detected. And we, of course, seen the case of the 2012 attack at the US embassy in Benghazi, where if this technology was in place, it would have easily detected individuals who were armed, individuals who were already on blacklists and wanted lists. The same thing goes for when you're doing any type of forensics. I've worked on dozens of cases involving forensics where we had to go through the hard drives of terror suspects to understand the material on their drives. So when law enforcement have massive databases that involve various types of suspect images, IDs, and passport copies and surveillance tapes, and you're able to run that against things like CCTV footage and other types of scans, you're able to quickly identify individuals and their associates. So throughout that, those many cases, if we had this type of technology in place, we would have saved time, saved money, saved manpower, but also solved cold cases that took many years to solve down the line. And finally, part of the trafficking and the smuggling is that when there is an individual who is a suspect, their identifiers are out, whether it's reported by the media, reported by agencies, or through intelligence sharing, you're able to then deploy that across the Scylla enhanced technologies across airports, across train stations, across various other areas, and detect that individual who is being trafficked and that individual who is a suspect.
To your point, like Scylla, just many people will ask, like, why Scylla and not other technology, right? So Scylla is the only basically video intelligence company globally that has been officially tested by multiple government and non-government agencies. We are the only one which can equally work on CCTV cameras, drones, body cameras, but also any autonomous device like dogs, for example, from Boston Dynamics, right? We are extremely accurate, especially for intrusion detection and weapon detection for long distances. And I can show you a couple of cases, but you can pretty much replace any intrusion detection system for border control or military base protection with Scylla. And it's tested. Again, we cannot disclose the results, but we can do it one by one on the product demos, right? When we get in touch with each other. So, and you can use it like even in parallel on top of drones and on top of CCTV cameras, and then they can work simultaneously as a swarm, right? So you can detect an activity from a camera, then you can send the information to drone can follow the target, we can track the target, etc. So again, these are not just words, we have all the metrics available. We can show you on the demos, like with official proofs from organizations that did this. Our intrusion detection and weapon detection is literally the best in the market, and it has been officially tested and approved.
It is true. You're a distinguished player in the market. You have already supported so many different organizations and agencies, but also you have already prevented attacks from taking place. That's something I can attest to as well. And I should say a great point on the use of drones, because in maritime technology, if I were to go back just briefly, here, also those ships are deploying now drones ahead of their destination to with Scylla's technology already fused in there, to be able to spot automatically any of those nautical drones. So it's not cameras just hooked onto the actual structure. Part of the central system is deploying those drones across with Scylla's technology. As you mentioned, body cams, thermal cams. The technology is not only so distinguished, but also we have actual cases where this has been successfully deployed, and this could be discussed with interested clients and parties. And again, my last slide, just really the key takeaways. This is a key ingredient in any intelligence architecture. In every single intelligence design I work on, in every single consulting where physical threat activities are being discussed, Scylla is always front and center in what I preach, AI video intelligence in general. We just want to prevent things from happening before they happen. In the case they happen, it is part of that investigative and forensics process. As I mentioned multiple times, and I can't mention this enough, it's a force multiplier for all types of teams, for all security teams, for all organizations, and ultimately speed and efficiency are absolutely vital. What that actually means when we talk about speed and efficiency, we're talking about shortening the time between detection and response. That is absolutely everything. I mean, think of just things like mass shootings, right? That we have seen now too many times to count, right? Again, the shorter the time between detection and response, the more lives you're able to save. And at this juncture, I will stop my long-winded comments on this, and I'm happy to, along with Albert, to take some of your questions. I think Anastasia might have gathered some questions for us.
I will do a very short demo, right? Because we have a question about the demo. I'll just give you a teaser.
Fantastic.
How accurate the system is. So Anastasia, if you give me an ability to share my screen.
Let me stop sharing. Perhaps Albert,
okay,
you are now the host.
Yes.
Yep.
So if you can see my screen, so this is a typical example of intrusion detection, right? So it's standard 1080 camera, not the most expensive one, right? Pretty easily available at any distribution market. So we are extremely accurate in detecting essentially the following objects. We can detect vehicles, we can detect transportation vehicles like buses, we can detect vessels, trucks, and we can track them across the scenario. So here, if you can see the distance and the height, the person is even hardly visible, right? Like even a human eye cannot distinguish a person, but the Scylla can detect it. And I can show you on one-to-one demos like how we do this for drones for military and other agencies, right? How they utilize us for military-based protection, critical infrastructure protection, etc. So this is one of the examples how the system works and how accurate is that. And here I'll stop the demo and we can proceed to the Q&A session. Yes, so one of the questions was about from Harish. What if a terrorist group captures a country like Afghanistan and like Taliban creating internal and external threats for the nation by the link to connect terrorist groups around the nation? So this is more your domain, right? So
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question one more time?
So if you can read the Q&A session.
Let's see.
Yeah.
What about a terrorist group that captures a country like Afghanistan, like the Taliban, that are creating internal and external threats for the nation by link to connect terrorism groups around the nation? To be frank with you, and this is, I think, a longer discussion to be had, when we look at a place like Afghanistan, which is absolutely vulnerable, not only the fact that there is now the Taliban is acting as a de facto governing body, but also groups like ISIS have now expanded and butting heads with the Taliban themselves. And now Afghanistan has become a launch pad for operations outside of Afghanistan. We've seen that happen against Central Asian countries like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. We've seen those attacks, of course, actualize in Moscow at those venues. What would the recommendation, or at least part of the recommendation, be? Because this is a multitude of solutions that have to come together, is that those nations that might be bordering Afghanistan and or those nations that have that could potentially be vulnerable from attacks from Afghanistan should enhance their security measures at those borders for interception. That would include both detection at the border, as well as drones that would be deployed to detect individuals who are crossing through the netherworld of those borders, which are highly lawless areas. But also, let's remember that a lot of those individuals who might be crossing in and out of those countries, who might be associates of suspected individuals, if they're crossing a specific country, their face, essentially biometrics, are already documented. So if they are traveling in a suspicious manner in multiple different suspicious patterns, then that's raising the question of why these individuals are traveling in this inconsistency. And of course, that individuals will be taken into interrogation. But I just want to add one more thing, that when I talk about things like data fusion or intelligence fusion, where things like facial recognition, suspicious patterns are also fused with other types of data sets that could include publicly available information, could include information from social media, it could include information from the dark web, from encrypted messengers and other places. When you fuse all of this data into those central fusion centers, the more you're able to have of that with a technology like Scylla, kind of on top of all of that multimedia that includes faces and biometric recognition, the more you're able to accurately understand if those individuals are representing who they are. But it's a much larger discussion around Afghanistan, given the political also implications that go with that, and who is in charge today, and why it is as complicated as it seems.
So we have another question from Tomasz, I guess, from Poland. So how would you comment the situation between the border of Belarus and Poland, also the southern border from the United States, and the border between Yemen and Saudi? Oof, that's a global question. I guess all are very tough, right? But
no, it's okay. I mean, look, at the end of the day, I remove my political hat when I talk about matters that impact civilians, right? Because at the end of the day, it is all about protecting the civilians, protecting the infrastructure. When we look at a place like the United States, the southern border of the United States, in fact, one of my recommendations recently to a specific party was to the implementation of Scylla at the south border of the United States, where millions of people are coming in and out of that border, which enables, again, agencies like Customs and Border Patrol and other agencies who are doing intelligence sharing with them to detect potentially suspicious individuals, especially if these individuals have already been reported to the United States by other agencies, but unfortunately that data or that intelligence was not fused with CBP. So Scylla would be absolutely perfect to enhance the existing infrastructure. When we talk about a place like Belarus and Poland, I think it goes without saying that similar measures would be implemented in place to detect suspicious individuals, especially individuals who've been raised by the security agencies as being foreign agents, or as being disruptors, being vandals, being potential terrorists. And the idea is that whichever border region you're on, enhancing the existing infrastructure with something like AI video intelligence becomes critical. I'm not sure if I answered your question to the best of to your contentment, I guess, but I'm happy to have a larger discussion outside of this webinar on also the political implications that come with protecting those border regions.
Okay. So another question is, how can Ukraine utilize a technology like Scylla AI in their war efforts?
Yeah, I think, Albert, you already probably touched on that quite a bit. I'm happy for you to even talk about it as well. Again, there are political implications in all of these questions when we talk about a war zone, or which country might be involved in attacks against the other country. But it all remains that when you have drone attacks, there is intrusion detection, there is breach of perimeter detection. There is, of course, the rapid response I talked about is against any types of threat, be it an individual, be it an object. So there are, surface to air defense measures that a country can take against those types of objects, flying objects. I would add one more thing, is that certain jammers that are added as part of the security protocols are also able to be deployed along with Scylla. So when you are detecting an object, automatically detecting an intrusion of that area, you also have a jammer attached to the drone, or a jammer can be deployed with another drone that could jam the signal of that drone to drop it before it reaches its target. So there are multiple ways that could be deployed. But again, since for the sake of talking about AI video intelligence, I wanted the focus to be specifically on how this specific technology has been deployed multiple times to assist organizations in preventing attacks and documenting foiled and successful ones.
Okay, so we have 5 questions today. Another question is, so there are already 2 nuclear plants in Europe which are under danger of being blown up. And how do you see the European authorities can protect their nuclear plants from a possible attack?
Absolutely. I think we talked about a couple of those examples already where it's been successfully deployed. I think replicating this approach, replicating this kind of infrastructure, or I should say the security structure in general. What's really cool about something like Scylla is that it fits in the existing security structure. You don't actually have to change anything. If you have the right CCTV cameras and you want to add more, that's fantastic. And fusing or deploying Scylla's suite of software into those existing cameras is absolutely a piece of cake. It's absolutely easy. So to your point, to your question, is that deploying something like Scylla in the existing security structure, which is absolutely cost effective, it is done overnight, essentially. It's super, super quick. And training security personnel, which Scylla provides, on how to use the system. And as you saw from the brief demo that Albert shows, it is absolutely easy to customize your platform and your dashboard to understand to protect your entire infrastructure. It's absolutely easy. So what these European countries can do, and I think there are probably more than 2 that are in danger, but deploying Scylla with the existing infrastructure, that's really, really easy. And I showed you some of those cases already, but this is something we can definitely discuss further on how that could take place. Again, all security personnel would be able to train on it. You have a command and control center, and then the rest is easy.
Okay, so we have more questions, but we are short of time, so apologies for that. We have 2 minutes left. If you want to get the product demo, or you want to get connected with Laith, or even like have more questions, feel free to connect with Anastasia. So Anastasia will reach out to all the participants after the webinar. And thanks for basically being with us, Laith, and sharing your experiences, right? It's actually
Thank you so much.
It appeared very interesting, right? Like, and there were many questions covering like global topics, which are beyond my understanding, right? So those are coming to your more or less domain. So I'm looking forward for the next webinar.
Thank you so much, Albert, and the Scylla team. I appreciate you having me on, and thank you everybody for attending. Again, more than happy to answer any questions as a follow-up. But yeah, thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye-bye.